Just a reminder, the webinar will start in less than a minute. And in the meantime, check out the slides that we are just streaming, which give you some information about our flagship product, EPC, the Enterprise Process Center, which you might not be familiar with. And later in the presentation, we will get back to that as well. So see you in less than a minute. Okay, so let's begin, shall we? First, let me introduce myself. My name is Mirko Thomas with Interfacing Technologies, and I will be your moderator today. Let me first thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar. It's great to have you all here today. Let me give you, before I hand over to our guest speaker, and I can already promise you, he will have an exciting discussion with you. Let me give you a little bit of background about the topic of the webinar today. So every organization, be it your own organization or your client's organization, produces goods and services that require collaboration across the whole organization, really. Once the need is determined, designing the product or service, building it, making it compliant, validating it, selling it, installing it, maintaining it, all these activities have to come together. And a cornerstone to successfully achieve this, and most of you know that because they have already been familiarized with our solutions. So one cornerstone to successfully achieve this is by using a leading solution, like our Interfacing Process Center. If you haven't heard about it before, check it out at interfacing.com. The foundation, though, to successfully achieve this is through cross-functional processes, or more specifically, through process-based management. How to put process management at the center of business management is what our guest speaker, Roger Tregear, will discuss with you today. And Roger will be talking about something that he calls reimagining management. Before I will hand over to Roger in a moment, but let me quickly introduce you to him. Roger has really spent his whole working life talking, consulting, thinking, presenting, and writing about the analysis, innovation, improvement, and management of business processes. He helps organizations improve performance, really. As the principal advisor of his own company, Tregear BPM, Roger provides business process and problem analysis consultancy services. He has 36 years of experience in this business as a management, business, and IT consultant. So I guess it's no surprise that Roger has an incredibly well-developed insight into business improvement and problem resolution. So before I hand over, I would like to let you know that at the end of the webinar, we will have a Q&A session. So please feel free to post your questions in the web chat of this webinar, and we're gonna answer them. So at this time, let me thank you again for joining this webinar. And now I'm handing over to our fabulous guest speaker, Roger Tregear. Roger, are you there?
Thanks, Mirko. Certainly am. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you to Interfacing for organizing this series of webinars and for inviting me to speak about my favorite topic, process-based management. As Mirko says, the title of this is the same as the title of my book, Reimagining Management. and I've chosen that those words very carefully because that's what I mean to do. And I hope I can either confirm your view of this or re-inspire you if you haven't come to this view that what we need to do is reimagine the way we manage. And thank you to all of you who have joined us for this live, or perhaps you're listening to the recording. I see some familiar names on the sheet, the attendee list. Good to see you, and lots of new names, new friends there as well. So welcome to you all. So yes, it's about putting process at the center of business management. I think this is fundamental, and I want to go on and make that case for you. Mirko's done the introduction. I won't labor all of those points, but the reason for this slide is more about all of those logos than about me. And the point of that, I mean, there's impressive organizations there. I'm proud of this. This is a partial client list, and I'm proud of them. But the point of that group is the diversity, because we've got very large organizations and very small organizations. We've got public sector, we've got private sector, we've got organizations of different organizational cultures, we've got different national cultures, and all of the things that I talk about in process-based management and that we'll cover in this presentation have either come out of projects in those organizations and or are used in organizations like that. So I know from long experience that what I'm talking about works in any organization. Maybe you have to make some adjustments around the edges in a particular organization, of course, but the basic approach, the basic theory works in any place. So I know it'll work in your organization. That's the good news. Let's get on and talk about that. I've done this kind of work for many years. It's something like 15 different countries I've worked in now, and I do that largely through partners around the world, Lulu Process in the US, BPT through Africa, the whole ES consulting group in the Arab states, Q3 Edge is my partner in India. I'm here in Australia. I'm just somewhere under that big red dot. I live in a little village called Bungendore. If your Australian geography is up to it, that's maybe 20 kilometres, what's that, 12 miles, something like that from Canberra, national capital. And Canberra is about 300 kilometres, which I guess is 180, 190 miles. Am I guessing that right? From Sydney, southwest of Sydney. So I'm there under that big red dot, and I've got partners here in Australia and New Zealand as well. So the work that I do is across the world, all sorts of different organizations. So there's a significant amount of practical background to everything I'm going to talk about. If you'll indulge me, I want to talk about one new project. It's just starting, literally starting. We're just having some initial workshops now. And this is at an area called Alula in the northwest of Saudi Arabia, somewhere north of Jeddah, if you like. And that's an area, Alula is an area of quite a large area, 22,000 square kilometres. So that's quite a size. And the Royal Commission for Alula is building tourism, building the economy, doing cultural development work there. This is one of those areas of the world where you've got this seriously ancient sites, you know, buildings carved out of sandstone mountains, that kind of thing. So I'll be here we can't travel at the moment, of course, so I'll be here in my office right here in Bungendore using some modern technology, working with people who are tasked to build this living museum out of ancient sites. So that's a nice kind of juxtaposition. And we'll be doing the standard kind of project that I do and using all of the material that we'll talk about here in this presentation. So I'm keen to get on with that project and see the mix of modern technology and ancient sites. Okay, so let's get on. Now I want to cover off just a couple of foundational definitional issues first, and I think that's always important. And the most foundational thing that we can talk about, of course, is the process. You know, what do we mean by process? And you get a bunch of people in a room, you'll get many different definitions, perhaps only different at the margins, but sometimes importantly different. So what do we mean by that? Well, firstly, I think we could all agree on these three characteristics: a process, a series of related activities, it's triggered by some event, and of course it transforms some set of inputs into a set of outputs. That's a minimalist definition. This is the kind of boxes and arrows definition of a process, and we can all agree with that. I go further though, because when I'm thinking about a process, I think we should include all of the resources and assets that are required for its execution and its management. So it's all of those systems and data and information and people and buildings and trucks and whatever is involved, all of those resources and other kinds of any kind of asset. I think we need to include that in our definition of a process, because it's fundamental. You know, it's included in there, and the process is not going to work without them. We also need, I think, to keep in mind that the process is delivering value to customers and other stakeholders. I go one step further, but this is fundamentally important. If this wasn't true, then we wouldn't be even talking about it, I think. I think a process is the only way that an organization can deliver value, that's products or services, outside the organization. That's a really important message, isn't it? The only way you can deliver value outside is via cross-functional processes. We'll talk some more about that in a moment, but that's the heart of process-based management. And so I think of this enlarged definition as a much more holistic, a much richer definition. And if we think about it like that, I think it solves a few problems in terms of our conception of process-based management. Anyway, at least you know now that when I say process, I mean this holistic definition. I'm not talking about the kind of boxes and arrows view only. I'm talking about the much richer definition. So that's a process. Now, this idea of cross-functional value delivery is also fundamental, isn't it? We haven't perhaps done much of this recently, but we remember how this works. We check in, we board the plane, we complete the flight, retrieve our luggage, we hope, and then we depart the airport. Now, if I was to ask you which of those 5 things needs to go really well for you to say that was a great flight, you'd say all 5 of them. Of course you would. We all would. No point having the world's fanciest check-in and you get the upgrade, great flight, just the movie you wanted, you arrive and your luggage doesn't. That's not going to be a great flight. If you arrive and your luggage does, and then you wait for an hour in the rain for a taxi, that's not going to be a great flight. So what we need to do is get each of those pieces working well, but they also need to work well together. So we might, and airports and airlines and transportation people think about it much more like this these days. The higher order process that groups those together, let's call it relocate traveler. And that's what needs to work well, isn't it? You know, the customer journey, the literal customer journey in this case, is from home to hotel or hotel to home or hotel to hotel. And it's the end-to-end thing that the customer wants to work well. And so does the airline and the airport and the taxi company and the train service. All of those people need it to work well, because it's obviously in everyone's best interest for it to flow nicely. So in all of our organizations, where this whole concept of cross-functional value delivery is really just fundamental. And sometimes we miss that. Here's my conceptualization of that. I think this is the most important principle of process-based management. I call it the primacy of process. And it says this: there are 2 dimensions to an organization: the functional or vertical organization and the process or horizontal organization. And we have both of these. One doesn't replace the other. They are different and equally important. In the vertical or functional direction, it's mainly about managing resources and about decision making, and it's important, and it's characterized by the organization chart. And we need that. Nobody's making nothing I say now will make any difference at all to the whole operation of an organization chart. But what we need to do is also understand now that we create, accumulate, and deliver value to our customers and other stakeholders across the organization. And that, we know that, don't we? I mean, this is the way it works. Someone does something else, someone does something else, and eventually we've got something that can leave the organization as value, as an exchange of value with our customer and ourselves. And the key artifact for that is going to be a process architecture. We'll talk about that again in a moment. Importantly, of course, when we think this is the way we create, accumulate, and deliver value, it's also the same thing as saying this is how we execute our organizational strategy. So here's process-based management on a single slide. If I was only able to use one slide for a presentation about this topic, it would be this one. We have the horizontal and the vertical, and we need both, and we need to manage both. Now, we spend most of our life, of course, in our organizations managing up and down. We create, accumulate, and deliver value across the organization. Who manages that? The org chart says nothing about who manages across the organization chart. Sure, we can say the CEO is in charge of everything, but she knew that. I mean, that's not a very practical thing. Who is it that's actually thinking about the value that we're delivering, and how is it optimized? So that's the horizontal view, and I think we're missing that horizontal vision in many organizations. And the whole point of process-based management is to fix that vision problem. So let me define process-based management as I use it. And it's a term I use in preference to BPM. We know, don't we, that BPM has so many meanings for different people. You say BPM and many people will think of a piece of software, or they'll think of automation, or they'll think of just straight process improvement. It's a very mixed kind of term. And I do use the term BPM. You'll hear me say it, of course. I mean, you've only got to look in the bottom right-hand corner of that slide. My designer was very keen to point out to me that Tregear process-based management was not going to be a good logo. Okay, so I use BPM, but I use it synonymously with process-based management, and for both of them, I mean a management philosophy. And this is the definition that I use. So continuous management of all the processes that create value, create and deliver value, and we know there's a hierarchy of those processes. Big processes decomposing into smaller processes. And we do that continuous management because we want to optimize the performance of particular high impact processes. So the point of continuous management is to improve the way in which we do continuous improvement. And so this definition is bookended by those two elements, which are very important. And everybody's doing some sort of improvement, aren't they? People are trying to make stuff work better. Of course they are. It's just the nature of organizations. But it may be not continuous, and sometimes the improvement's not quite as good as you'd like it to be. And not as enough organizations, I think, are doing active continuous management of processes. And we'll go on and talk about what I mean by active process management. So we want to continue with continuous improvement. We want to get better at it, of course. We want to improve the process of process improvement. And then we want to add continuous management so that we're making better quality decisions and getting better outcomes from our continuous improvement. So how do we do that? Well, these are the circles that I've been developing for a long time. They started out more complicated, and I try and simplify things. I'm a great one for simple diagrams. You know, I think as process practitioners, one of the things that we should be able to bring to our organizations is some simplicity, not more complexity. Organizations are way too complex anyway. Wouldn't it be nice if we could actually bring some simplicity to the act of management? As simple as possible, but no simpler, of course, as the man said, but let's not try and make life more complicated than it needs to be. So I think the circles are a metamodel for management and a continuous improvement engine, a perpetual improvement engine. Let's talk about the circles. There are two of them, obviously, the PO or process ownership circle and the PI or process improvement circle. Now, when we're talking about the circles, we're thinking about one process. Big process, small process, doesn't matter. It'll apply to any size of process, anywhere in the process hierarchy. Let's start with the PO circle. So the PO circle is all about process ownership, or if you like, continuous management of a process. So it's got 3 nodes: target, assess, respond, target, assess, respond, target, assess, respond. I think that's the drumbeat of process-based management. Target, assess, respond. Firstly, we set targets. These are process KPIs and their targets. All the usual KPI stuff applies. The critical few, not the important many. What is it? If this process was working as well as its stakeholders would like it to, what is it doing and how would we know? That's the question. From that, we derive what the maybe it's 1 or 2 or 3, maybe it's 4 or 5, but I wouldn't like to see it more. KPIs for the process. Now, these are process KPIs. They conceptually have nothing to do with all of those functional KPIs you got out of your strategic analysis and balanced scorecard, etc. That's a separate set. That's measuring something different. So these are process KPIs and their targets. And then the second node is assess. We're going to do a couple of things there, and we'll certainly assess performance. The target is 9 out of 10 and it's 8.5 out of 10, or it's 9.5 out of 10. We'll look at the data. We'll plot the dots and look at the data. So that's performance management, but also here we need to incorporate idea management. If you like, the whole innovation piece, because whatever else you're innovating in your organization, you're innovating processes. And it's pretty hard to innovate at all without touching a process. That's just not the way it works. So we don't want to separate innovation from process management because they're closely coupled. So at Assess, we'll do performance management and idea management to make sure that we're collecting that. So is there a performance problem or opportunity? Is there another opportunity to use some new technology, some new way of thinking, some new application of another resource, some new model for operation? So we'll do that. And then now the third and perhaps most important node of the PO circle is respond, because if we're not responding, then what was the point? 3 things might happen at the respond node. We might say, hey, everything's fine, KPIs are all good, no ideas to test, no trends to worry about, everything's okay, nothing to see here, move on. Okay, that's good, and maybe that's what would normally happen in a nice stable process with an acceptable performance. Occasionally, we need to say, hey, we need to review the targets and the KPIs. Maybe we should do that on a regular basis every 6 or 12 months anyway, just to make sure they're still okay. Or maybe something's changed in the environment that forces us to review that. Or maybe what we've been measuring with some particular KPI, the last 3 or 4 times we've taken the data, it's been the same. So if we're now measuring a constant, that's obviously a waste of time. We don't need to measure a constant. So we need to review the targets. So that might be the second thing we would do there on a regular basis or as required basis. Now, it might also be, though, that we need some intervention because there's been a performance opportunity or problem, or we've got some new idea that we want to test. And that will trigger the PI circle. Now, the PI circle is probably much more familiar to us all. This is shown here in its most generic form, classic as is, to be, to do. Current state, future state. To do is my shorthand way of saying these are all of the things that we've got to do to create the new as is. Reminding ourselves, of course, that the purpose of a process improvement project is not to create a to be. Too many projects seem to stop at that point. The purpose of a process improvement project is to create a new as is. We need to keep going and actually make the changes, don't we? And then make sure that they've done. Now, PI circle shown there in its generic form, but any process improvement analysis and improvement methodology that you wanted to insert there will work. Lean, Six Sigma, Nest, Sprint Pip, CME, anything you want, something you've made up yourself, because they're all fundamentally about current state, future state. What have we got to do to create a new current state? So you can plug that in there, and I've made it as generic as possible, just so it has a wider application. Now, sometimes the changes we make to a process will happen quickly, won't they? We can do it this afternoon, and we'll know the results by close of play. Sometimes, though, it takes much longer. Some IT intervention, something to be built, it might take months before we can see what's going on. So that benefit realization piece is sometimes difficult. But with the circles here, that PO circle kept turning. So it keeps turning, and it'll turn at whatever is the appropriate speed related to the cadence of the process. So it might be happening in near real time, or it might be daily, weekly, monthly, whatever the process is doing. So we've always got that. And we've got some mechanism to say, how's this process working? And we build deep understanding of how it's working. We're also saying what might change. We can do some risk analysis. We can say what's happening? Where are we exposed to some performance failure? And then we trigger a turn of the PI circle when we need to do the deeper analysis. So I talk a lot about getting the circles turning, and you now know what I mean by that. Literally mean these circles, and I want to get them turning. And most organizations are doing some form of the PI circle. I think we could all do a lot more in terms of the PO circle. Not to change perhaps what we're doing for process improvement, but to add this other layer of process ownership, process management. So to go back to my continuous management, continuous improvement, obviously PO circle is about continuous management, and process improvement is about continuous improvement. So that's the circles, and we want to get the circles turning. Now, how do we get the circles to turn? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I've got 7 things that I know enable the circles. And these 7 enablers came out of lots of project work. I remember the time I was at a conference, in fact, making a list, thinking, what are all the things you've got to get right to make this work and to sustain it? Not just to make it work for a week or 2, but to actually have it working pretty continuously. Well, I came up with these 7, and I'm going to speak about them quite briefly now. In my book, Reimagining Management, there's a chapter on each of these. You can check that, and there's plenty of other material on my website as well, where I've spoken about these in papers and my various columns that I write for others. So let's go through. So firstly, I use the Mobius strip icon because it has the classic feature of not having a start and a finish. And I mean to imply from that all 7 of these enablers are important, equally important. And if any of them are missing, then you'll have a problem. I'm often going into organizations where they're doing process-based management, trying to get it going, but it's not quite happening. And the first thing we do is go and look at what's happening in each of these, and we'll find at least 1 or more of these that aren't quite working, and that's holding everything else up. The good news is that they're not independent variables, they're very much interconnected. So being interconnected means that if you change one, you're going to change another couple, have some impact on it. If you're working on changing 2 or 3, then you'll be impacting all of them. And that's good, because what we want to be doing is building these more or less in sync to give ourselves the best chance of getting those circles turning and keeping them turning. So let's just talk about each of them briefly. They're all equally important. I'll start though with architecture, because if we don't know what our processes are, then we're not going to be able to do too much more. So the process architecture is just making the processes visible. I mean, what are those processes? We'll start from the top and derive it from strategy and work our way down. What are the processes, and what's the hierarchy, and what's the context of those processes? Having identified processes, there are 2 things we want to know about measurement. We want to know how they are performing and how they should perform. The third thing, keep in mind that innovation piece, we might want to know how they could perform. How they are performing, how they should perform, how they could perform. That's a moving target, isn't it? We want to have some way of keeping focused on that. And then we need someone who's going to take some notice of those measurements and those opportunity or problem gaps, performance gaps. You know the phrase, perhaps mind the gap. We can apply it here, and the gap is the performance gap, and it's a cross-functional process performance gap. So maybe it's nobody's job to even think about it, but we need to correct that. We need to create a new role that will deal with that, and we need to say, okay, well, there's a performance gap. Do we care? Okay, The KPI target said it's got to be 9 out of 10, and it's 8.8 out of 10. Okay, so does that point to, who cares? You know, what is the impact of that? What would be the impact of fixing it? What would be the impact of not fixing it? How do we prioritize that? You know, we've got hundreds, if not thousands, of processes that probably could be improved. We can't do it all, so we've got to get very good at making some very high quality decisions about where to apply scarce resources to an effectively infinite space. So we need that process governance piece, an additional overlay to a part-time role for a process that will have someone looking at that end-to-end view, and thinking about performance and what's happening and what could happen differently. Now, change is in the middle of this list, but of course it's fundamental to everything we do, isn't it? If we're not making change, by which I mean proven, valued business benefits, then by our own process definitions, we are waste and should be eliminated. That would be a little embarrassing for process practitioners. So I take a hard line on this, you know, and when I say change, I don't mean we've modeled 500 processes or we've drawn some clever architecture. You know, these are important artifacts and tools to be used, but the change we're looking for is the phrase I'm always using: proven, valued business benefits. So it's a business benefit, not just we've done a bunch of modeling. None of your organizations has a problem called we don't have enough process models. That's not a known business problem, any organization, anywhere in the entire universe. We have lots of other problems, but that's not one of them. We might want to have lots of models to build our knowledge and understanding, etc., but it's not the problem. So it's got to be a business benefit. It's got to be valued not just by the BPM team, but by the business, and it's got to be proven, not just asserted. And you know, proof can be pretty demanding. But if we've got the circles turning, then we're doing lots of measurement, target, assess, respond. We've got that circle turning all the time, so we've got the data. Mindset, we need everyone to be involved in the process work, of course. Everyone's going to be impacted. So we need to have some shared mindset about what we mean by it, why it's important, how we go about it. If you like, a process-aware culture is what we need. So we need to, if we're going to do process, we need to think process, and we need to have some common way of thinking about process and process management and improvement. And I always like to say, we don't want 5 process analysts, we want 5,000, which is to say we want everyone in the organization to play some role in process management, process analysis, process improvement. Now, that doesn't mean everyone's going to go off and do several weeks of training, of course not. But you know, the subject matter experts in our processes are out there executing them right now. And sometimes we ignore that valuable resource. We don't ask them what's going on, how could we improve this, etc. So we need to involve everyone, and people need to be given the capability to do that. That's what the capability enabler is all about. We can't just say, you know, send out an email and say, hey, congratulations, you're all now empowered to be process analysts. Good luck with that. You know, I think we've tried that kind of change management often enough to know it doesn't work. So we need to have something definite, something planned for each of these enablers. We need a plan, a specific plan. They won't just happen organically. Now, we do need to have some central support group, for sure. It's an inherent part of the whole governance piece. And it's the super users, it's the people who are doing perhaps compliance management. They're probably doing some quality control. They're there to coach and mentor. I think, though, we need to be very careful about this. For me, their role is to build capability across the organization. And I think it's a big mistake to say we've got the Office of BPM or the Process Excellence team, the BPM team, whatever it's called, and imagine that they're going to do all the process work, because they can't, can they? I mean, they just can't. They would become a bottleneck. You'll pretty quickly develop the Office for the Prevention of Process Improvement. So they're the enablers. So let's dive in here. This is a process architecture. This is the key artifact. This is for a hospital. So obviously, we've got processes there about caring for patients, about developing healthcare professionals. That's a research hospital, a teaching hospital. So this is what a process architecture looks like. And you'll see there a high-level core process called care for patients. And we can drill down into that to get lower-level processes. For presentation purposes, these processes are being shown in PowerPoint, of course, which is not nobody's recommended modeling tool, but it's good for presentation, so that's why it's like this. So now we can start building that view of the organization as a set of cross-functional processes and drilling down to see what's below. Here's another example for a university. So we start with strategy always. We always want to start with strategy to see what it is we promise. For this university is another real project. This is a kind of summary of their strategy. Obviously, they want to develop graduates, valuable graduates. They want to do good research, and they want to make a contribution to their community. So, you often have to sometimes get to the point of saying, okay, what is your strategy if it's not clearly defined, and you have nice conversation about that. And now we know that our processes are going to execute that strategy. So now we can say, what are the highest level core processes that execute that strategy? Produce graduate, create and apply knowledge, engage society and industry. Now, it's not quite as simple as going click, 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 of course, but we do this in series of workshops and discussions, lots of discussions, and what are the words we use and how do we want to do it? And we get lots of engagement and lots of feedback so that particularly these core processes have lots of meaning. So then we take that's the highest level processes, and you can see here a high level view of the processes of the university. And by the way, this picture showing those upper level management at the top, core processes and supporting processes at the bottom, this is a picture of everything the university does. It's a high level picture, of course, and this is a modern multi-campus bricks and mortar and digital university with campuses in Australia and throughout Southeast Asia. You'll see that we started out with produce graduate, and we ended up with 2 versions of that using their terminology. That's for undergraduate and postgraduate work. Lots of conversation about that. Decision was we needed 2 because they were different enough. We decompose those, okay, and then we can do that again, and we can keep doing that as often as we need to get down to lower and lower level processes. So that gives us a very good understanding of the processes of an organization. And that's got nothing to do with the organization chart, of course, has it? I mean, all sorts of parts of the organization get involved in pretty much all of those processes. Now, we know, don't we, even if you're not a gardener, that there's a bit more to gardening than having a packet of seeds and a shovel. You know, if you want to create that, which I'd love to say is my backyard, but it's nothing like that. If we need the seeds, of course, and we need the implements, of course, but we need a vision. We need all of those things. We need the hardware, the software. We need the vision, the strategy. We need the plans. We need the risk management. We need lots of hard work on a continuous basis, and the work of maintaining it never ends. You know, if you've done if you have a garden at all, you know that weeding is a never-ending process. So we need that. We need to understand how it all comes together, all of the parts, put them together, and keep understanding that and keep working it. And the same applies if we're building a process-based management system. Now, we might have a bunch of individual pieces, but that's not a system. But I think if we've got the circles turning properly, then that is a process-based management system, and we can keep it going. And we know what the touch points are and what's required to get it going. How do we get started on that? Well, first build the process architecture down a few levels. We don't need 10 levels of it to start with, just maybe 2 or 3 is plenty. And then I would always suggest we just select, you know, I say 5. You could do it for 1 if you wanted to. You can do better than 1, 2, 3, 5. No, I wouldn't do more than 5. I think that gets too challenging. We get the circles turning, just to say we're setting KPIs and targets and appointing process owners and getting all that going. And when that's stable, those 5, then pick another 5. Now we've got 10 underway. And the initial 5 process owners maybe are mentoring the next 5. And then once we've got those 10 underway, maybe we can add another 10 at that point because we're getting good at this. So we're easing our way into this. We're building this, we're reimagining management in an incremental way. And I think that's going to work much, much better than some sort of big bang approach where we say we'll do 20, 30, 50 processes all at once. I think that's just too much. We're building a management system, and in the process of doing that, of course, with the circles turning, we're creating this perpetual improvement engine. Here's another way to think about process performance management. There are 3 levels to this. At the top, we're talking about all of the processes, and as I've just been saying, we build the process architecture from the strategy. And then we can start looking at individual processes. So what are its objectives, define the KPIs, and what are the targets for those KPIs? So for an individual process, if it was working as well as everyone wants it to, what would it be doing and how would we know? So having defined the performance, now we manage that performance. We keep looking for performance or problem or opportunity gaps. We evaluate the impact of that gap. We make the change as appropriate. And I'm liking the term these days, active process management. And you can see I'm identifying over here that those bottom 2 levels, I think, are about active process management. It's not just modeling, it's not just drawing diagrams, it's not occasionally thinking about it, but it's actively looking. We want to not just report process performance, we want to predict it. We don't want to just fix problems, we want to avoid them. Much more active view. What does that look like in practical sense? Deep dive here into what I call a process management record, a set of data. Obviously, this is in a bunch of tables. You might keep it in all sorts of other places, but this is the sort of data we want. I won't go into the details of all of this, but I want to know what's the process, who's the process owner, what's it about, give me a description, give me a snapshot of its current levels of performance, why is this important, what's going on, what are we concerned about, what are the KPIs? You see we listed 3 KPIs there, and their targets, and the measurement method, what's the current level of performance, and what's the impact of closing any gaps, or indeed not closing the gaps. And then related to each of those KPIs, we would have a whole bunch of activities, initiatives, some big, some small, that are going on. So you can see in the action plan summary down the bottom, it's keyed by KPI ID. There's the IDs up here. So for particular KPIs, we've just got a summary here of what's going on. This is the information that I want a process owner to be dealing with. I want them to be conscious of this. I want them to know what's going on, have conversations with appropriate people to understand, to get a deep, rich understanding of the process and what it's all about. Because my question is that I like to leave people with is this: what if the best process in your organization was the process by which you improved all of your other processes? Your most effective and efficient process was the process of process management and improvement. What would be the impact of that? I think it'd be profound, don't you? The thing you were best at was improving all your other processes. If that's not strategic, fundamental, then I don't know what is. Can you do that? Yeah, I think you can. I've just been explaining to you how you can. I hope you found that useful. We've got time now for questions. 15 minutes left for questions, so I'll hand it back to Mirko, and he can feed me the questions.
Yes, thank you, Roger. Yeah, the first question which has been asked is that in your slides, you refer to BPM, to business process management. But for somebody who wants to dive a little bit deeper into your process-based management concept, what is the common reference for that?
Sorry, Mirko, just do that again. I'm not sure that I caught the question properly. It was a bit of a breakup.
So no worries. What is the reference for process-based management? So we all know BPM is business process management. So what is the common term, the common reference, the common description for process-based management?
Or what would be the acronym, the equivalent of BPM?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, yeah, I struggle with that because, PBM doesn't sound so right, does it? And it's very confusing. So I tend not to have a shorthand way of saying it. As you just heard me say a fair bit, I suppose, I refer to process-based management. If someone could come up with a better phrase, something easier, then that would be terrific. I'd be happy to hear it. But PBM isn't, you know, that just sounds like you misspoke, or it looks like a typo. So it's confusing, and yeah, don't know.
Okay, I see. Actually, the second question I can ask myself. So, of course, we're going to share the material that both us and Roger have been showing here in the webinar. We're going to share that with you. So after the webinar, we will send a package to you, and also the video will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, where you're going to find the webinar too. Next question for you, Roger. So you spoke about discovering and documenting a process architecture. The question that has been asked is, how long does it take, and how is it done to, you know, to develop that, to get there?
Yep. So the glib answer, of course, is that it takes forever, because it's never fixed, it's never finished. It's a continuous, you know, that's a continuous piece of continuous management. But that's not the question that was asked, of course. So if I was starting from scratch, from a blank sheet, and we're often not, of course, because everyone's got something about processes, but for simplicity's sake, let's say we're starting from a blank sheet. I actually start from strategy, vision, mission. What is it we promised? What are the value propositions? Because those high-level promises will tell us what our highest level processes are, and then I would break those down another 2 levels, so we'd end up with 3 levels to start with. Now, that's the kind of minimum viable process architecture. It doesn't stop at 3rd level, of course. It goes down whenever you need it to. But I would think that kind of work, for me, that takes 3 or 4 weeks of workshops, and probably spread over maybe 6 or 8 weeks, just to, you know, I like to allow some gaps in there. You could knock something up in a couple of days, you know, locked in a room, but it has no maturity, it hasn't had any circulation. So a couple of months we would get to that, and it's workshops. You know, we set up a series of workshops with a core team of people, and then we've got subject matter experts, and we're having briefing sessions of work in progress with all sorts of key decision makers. So usually a pretty intense couple of weeks, have a break, come back and do another couple of weeks, by which time we've got 3, 4 or 5 pilot processes with process owners, and we're just starting to get the circles turning.
Okay, got a few more questions. So one is that you have been talking about, or you have been suggesting that clients should start managing just a few processes. I think you said 5, right? Out of probably 100 or even 1,000 processes that exist in an organization. So the question that has been asked is there a risk at a given organization, for example, with the decision makers, that the organization might be underwhelmed by this low level of engagement?
Yeah, so we're talking about reimagining management here, right? So I think there's also a risk that we have to balance of overwhelming the organization with the idea that we're going to change everything, and it's all going to change at 9 o'clock on Monday, which is not what we're saying at all, and it wouldn't work anyway. I mean, that's not what we're going to do. So you remember the mindset enabler? That's fundamentally important, and it comes into play here, where we have to set expectations. We have to understand what's going on. And taking 5 processes, you know, we have to, these are the pilot processes. We want to demonstrate how it works. We can do it for 1, as I said, but, you know, they won't all be good examples, perhaps. Some will be better than others. So taking 1, we're a bit exposed. So, you know, 3, 4 or 5, no more. But we're going to select them carefully. And we're not going to pick the trivial processes. But neither would I want to pick the most complicated piece of the business that's fraught with politics and difficulty and market pressures. I mean, you know, this is, we're trying to demonstrate success here, and we're trying to get a little practice in. So, you know, somewhere in the middle, something serious that has some issues, but something that's practical. And 5 is a lot, and you know, we need to be thinking about how we're presenting this to the organization. We need a communications plan. well, who are we going to tell? You know, and we're going to run this for 2 months, and then we're going to have an all-staff meeting of some sort, and we're going to present. The process owner will present what's happened, what's happening, what problems we've had, what successes we've had. You know, we can start to feed it back, and I think that's much more controllable. So, you know, the temptation, I think, sometimes is to say, oh no, look, let's just get stuck in and do lots of processes at once. And I'm not saying that can't work, but I am saying it's unlikely. I mean, it has worked. I know organizations where it's worked, but it's a massive thing. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of disruption. And I think if you take 5, 2 months later, you take another 5, at the end of 4 months, you've got 10 processes going well. Then you could take another 10 because you're getting good at it. Now you've got 20. And, you know, most organizations, even large, complex organizations, if they think about this, they might discover that there are only, maybe it's 20 or 30, maybe it's 40 or 50 high impact processes that they have to actively manage. Because we can't manage hundreds of processes, and certainly not thousands. And we shouldn't even try, that's just impossible, you know. So just like we're not trying to model all of our processes, we can't be trying to manage all of our processes. It's just, you know, we've got to be selective, you know, limited resources, infinite space, match that up.
Clear. We got another question from Laura. Laura, thank you so much for that. It's again about the process architecture. And she's asking, what are your thoughts on using something like the APQC process classification framework to accelerate the development of such an architecture?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. So you might remember from the process architecture pictures that I had, I've got at the top, I have shared management processes, core processes in the middle, shared support processes or enabling processes at the bottom. For management and support processes, you know, every organization has those processes, and there's probably, I don't know, there might be 90% the same in my tiny organization as in a large, you know, as in interfacing. I mean, everyone's doing HR and IT and project management and finance, and we're doing strategy and risk management. We're doing all of those things. And we might call them something different, but they're the same, particularly at the high levels. So there, something like a reference model would be useful. And in fact, over the years, I've built my own reference model. And when we're doing these kinds of projects, then for management and support processes, I would start there. I never, ever try and use a reference model for core processes. Because a reference model, I mean, it can work. And if you're in a particular business and there is an existing reference model that really talks about your business and isn't generic, then maybe it's okay. But the danger in using a generic model for core processes is that it doesn't sound like you. You know, you end up with processes that are, you know, generic order to cash type process. And it doesn't say, you know, it doesn't use your terminology. You haven't had the experience of all of those workshops and the many conversations and arguments about what that strategy really means. You know, the vision mission looks great on the wall, lovely polished prose, lots of graphics, nice graphic arrangement. But when you actually start to pull it together and say, what does this mean? You know, it's not always as obvious. And that's a very significant benefit to come out of tearing apart the strategy and trying to turn it into a set of processes using your terminology. You know, the university didn't have undergraduates and postgraduates. It had different terms for that. So you use their terms. Yeah, I think it's a mixed thing. I think where they are generic standard processes, of course, no need to reinvent the wheel. And for a lot of those, you know, project management, PMBOK, etc., is a process model. In the IT world, COBIT, ITIL, all of these things are process models, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But when it comes to your core business, you want to be very careful. You're talking about your business and not everybody else's.
Okay. Actually, we have more questions about process frameworks or what those well-known process frameworks. among them from Charlie, for example. We're going to forward these questions to Roger. And by the way, keep posting your questions even over the next couple of days. We're going to all forward them, and you will get an answer from us as soon as possible. We also had a question from Karen again about the distinction between BPM and process-based management. So that seems not to be entirely clear. But if you all don't mind, dear attendees, I will ask a question which comes from a completely different angle. The question has been handed in by Shantanu. From your experience of many projects across verticals and geographies, without the circles turning and all those 7 enablers present, how are these organizations sustaining, growing, and delivering shareholder value?
It's one of the problems of process management world generally, isn't it? That annoyingly organizations seem to be successful without even doing it. So they have no concept of process, but they seem to go okay. Well, I think the point is that they could go a lot better, and probably lots of people are doing process management. Lots of people are doing it the hard way, tying up all of those pieces, solving the problem. So I think you can do better, and someone probably is doing it, but they're probably not calling it that. I mean, or they're just hoping everything comes together, which doesn't sound like a great strategy.
All right. So I think we are really running a little short of time now. So we will take the remainder of the questions offline. And again, you will get each attendee will get your package. So first of all, Roger, thank you very much for this excellent presentation. And everybody else, the attendees, thank you very much for joining us today. Roger, if you could bring up the last slide.
Sure.
There you're gonna find our contact details again. Here we go. Yep. So, and also, by the way, Roger's contact details. So, I mean, we are closely collaborating with Roger, so we certainly don't mind if you also reach out to Roger directly. And thank you very much. I'm glad to announce that there will be early next year, there will be a follow-up event together with Roger. And even for that, you know, inspire us. So if you know now a little bit about Roger's background, and you know what his key topics are, and check out his books and get inspired and inspire us. You know, what focus should we put on future events that we might run together with Roger? We are really open-minded there, and yeah, would appreciate your input. For today, thank you very much. Have a nice morning, have a nice day, have a nice evening, wherever you might be right now, and see you soon again. Bye.
Thank you.